addition to the weekly printed version of the newsletter journal, we also promote our community and share important information on our award-winning website, newslj.com, and in our weekly email newsletter, Nuke Now. We also connect with readers through various social media platforms and invite you to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can even take a look at a recent meeting of the City Council, School Board, or County Commission on our YouTube channel. We do hope that you will go to newslj.com and subscribe today, and we look forward to making all of our great content available to you. But regardless of your level of support, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for doing your part to preserve a free and independent local press.
Good evening, everyone. Hello. We did not bring a microphone, so I will do my best to project. Can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
Okay. I feel like I'm yelling, so I apologize to those in the front. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Appreciate you taking time out of your schedules. My name is Chad Kraus, and I'm the field manager for the Bureau of Land Management here in Newcastle. I'm grateful for the turnout tonight. We held an early engagement meeting back in May, where we had a good turnout here in Newcastle with good participation from folks. And so I admit I had a little bit of hesitancy to come back out and share quite similar information to what we had shared before. But the feedback that we received from folks is that our resource management plan revision was important enough to people that they wanted every opportunity possible for public involvement and engagement. And so we're back. And I'm grateful for people taking time out of their schedules and being here tonight. Great turnout. I hope everyone has found a seat. If you haven't, there's a few scattered amongst us. I think for introductions, at our last meetings we had it fairly casual and introduce around the board. I don't think we'll do that here tonight due to the great turnout, and so we'll just introduce our BLM folks, and then we'll jump into the presentation. So once again, my name's Chad Kraus. I'm the field manager here in Newcastle. Relatively new, came in October, and so if I didn't have a chance to greet you coming through the door, sorry I missed you. So let's go this way.
Well, I'm Jim Hutchinson. I'm the assistant field manager, and I arrived in Newcastle in 1997 and worked a lot of oil and gas for many years, and I've been the assistant field manager for 7 years this fall. So I know many of you here, and it's good to see you, and just looking forward to presenting where we're at with the program and as far as the plan and where it's at, looking forward to comments and kind of guiding from a community perspective of where this is headed, and glad you're here tonight.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Lacko. I'm the project manager for the RMP revision, and I sit at the High Plains District Office in Casper, Wyoming. And my contact information is in a handout that you can take if you have any questions.
And we also have a contractor that's assisting us with the effort, and we have some of our teammates from EMPSI here. Josh and
Hi everyone, my name is Josh Schnabel from the Boulder office of EMPSI. We're assisting with this process and for the rest of the document.
You need the microphone, I can't hear you.
Okay. My name is Josh Schnabel. I'm with EMPSI in Boulder, Colorado, and we're assisting BLM with the NEPA process, which includes this public meeting.
And my name is Shine Roshan, and I'm here with EMPSI as well with Josh.
And then we also have Scott Benson, who's in the back and was helping get seats arranged. Scott, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Scott Benson. I'm with the Newcastle BLM office, just realty specialist.
So with that, my apologies to those that participated in May. Some of the information will be similar, but I think we've tried to add some as well. So the purpose of this slide, and Kathleen, should I say, is this presentation available on our website?
It will be, it isn't yet.
It will be, okay, yeah. Sometimes you give a presentation, and people are frantically trying to take notes or take a screenshot picture or something. You don't have to do that. It'll be made available should you so deem. But these are the lands that are affected by our planning effort. And so just to clarify, we are doing one planning process, but there will actually be two resource management plans that come out of the effort. One for Newcastle, which is Crook, Weston, and Niobrara counties in Wyoming, and then one that actually covers the entire state of Nebraska. I feel like that skews our map and makes it a little bit hard to look at because most of the ownership is actually within Crook, Western, and Niobrara County, shy of 300,000 surface acres and about 1.7 million federal mineral estate. The entire state of Nebraska sounds greater than it is. There's only 5,100 surface acres of BLM administered lands in the entire state of Nebraska. I alluded in our introduction that we've done some prior engagement and outreach efforts, and through those communications, we've learned a lot of things, and we've heard some pretty consistent themes across the board. One I alluded to already in the introduction, and that was a strong desire from the public to have every opportunity possible for public involvement. The other theme was generally heard a dissatisfaction for how the planning processes went in the 90s for these efforts. The Newcastle RMP was most recently revised in 99, and Nebraska was 1992, so there were a couple of the older plans, and there was generally dissatisfaction, I would say, with how those processes went, so we're trying to be cognizant of that. Excuse me. We received a request that we do hard notifications to all grazing permittees and lessees, and we decided to do that actually for three reasons. One was to help get the word out. Two, the grazing permittees are an important stakeholder, and the third reason we decided to do that was because we were asked to. You probably saw on that earlier slide, and there will be another one, there's a substantive amount of what are referred to as split estate lands within the planning area, which are private surface with federal minerals underneath. And we heard quite a lot of concern about the impacts of decisions BLM makes on the fluid minerals and how that impacts private property rights or could impact private property rights. But even more so heard concerns over the economic potential impact that they affect the viability of adjacent land ownership and the economics there of surface use agreements and things like that with fluid mineral leasings. And so that was a pretty dominant theme that we heard. We heard questions about land special designation processes, and we fielded a number of questions about, I'll just say, other headquarter level BLM initiatives going on that aren't directly related to this planning effort. And so while a lot of the information is similar in May, hopefully we can touch and provide some greater clarity of information in regards to some of those other items in this presentation. Excuse me. Next slide, please, Kathleen, if you don't mind. This slide, like I said, two planning efforts. This slide is a little bit closer look at the Newcastle, which I'm assuming most folks in here are familiar, but Crook, Weston, and Niobrara counties. The left slide depicts surface ownership within the planning area, and the right schematic there depicts federal mineral estate within the planning area. So there's a few key messages that I think these visuals display. One, that BLM ownership pattern is very scattered. It's a scattered ownership pattern. There's a skewed ratio of surface ownership to federal mineral estate, which I've already picked up on, excuse me. And the one thing we included in this slide is roughly 31% of the minerals in this planning area are currently under lease. Excuse me. And so this area, what we're trying to present with that is has a long history of leasing, exploration, excuse me, and development. So there's a long history of that. Oh, sorry, I'm glancing back at my notes here. Can you go back a slide? Just wanted to make one clarification on the left here. You kind of see some green and beige. There are other federal ownerships within the planning area, Forest Service and grasslands that do contain federal minerals. And I did want to clarify that while they are in the planning area, that's not part of the the decision space or the plan that we're working on. So next slide, please, Kathleen. Excuse me. Nebraska, I don't mean to, like I said, by any stretch diminish it, but there's only 5,100 surface acres in the state of Nebraska, with BLM in an even greater skewed ratio of split estate, roughly a little over 200,000 acres of federal mineral estate. And so it is worth noting, same thing I was taught once, never make assumptions. This map was so difficult to predict, meaningfully project that these shaded counties are just counties that contain BLM ownership within them. They are not that. Most of the BLM acreage in Nebraska are small, isolated 40-acre parcels that are non-contiguous. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this? I'm going to start with the least interesting answer, at least for myself, is because we have to. The Federal Lands Policy and Management Act requires that BLM periodically inventory their resources and develop plans for their management, and we do that through these resource management plans. Typically, those are done on a 20 to 30-year cycle, depending upon when it starts. There's a lot of prep work, and there's been a lot of prep work that done before tonight in terms of contract execution and things of those nature. And so typically a 20 to 30-year cycle. I mentioned earlier Newcastle was last revised in 1999, and Nebraska was 1992. I might be wrong, Kathleen, you can correct me. I think Nebraska is the oldest plan in all BLM, right? Okay. Great. So what is a resource management plan? The one thing, and just to sort of eliminate some confusion and maybe help with your commenting and involvement through the process, it's a broad scale over a very large area, as you saw by the maps, and it's a land use allocation for those BLM administered lands and minerals. And so it provides guidance and direction to certain areas. And the example that I'm going to give is with fluid mineral leasing, or essentially oil and gas, because it's sort of one of the easiest, I guess, for me to wrap my mind around. But an example of what is going to come out of a resource management plan would be a broad scale of what lands are open to fluid mineral leasing, and if they are open, under what constraints. And so it's a broad type of plan like that. So what RMPs don't do is go into like an oil well would go here, or a fence or road or range improvement project here. They may guide some of those activities, but they don't go into that detail of site-specific items. And BLM team too, if I miss a point that bears needing, jump in, please.
They don't change valid and existing rights.
Oh, thank you very much, yes. Resource management plans do not change valid existing rights or authorizations that are in place at the time of those plans. So existing oil and gas leases that are in place, grazing permits, rights of ways, other types of actions. The more interesting answer, which is also where and this is, I'm not going to read, I'm not a slide reader. Like I said, this will all be available. This is the purpose and need of our planning effort, and the more interesting answer is responding to changes that have occurred over the life of the plan. And at our earlier meetings back in May, I kind of gave the example about my career with the BLM has spanned about the life of these plans roughly, Newcastle in particular, and I was thinking of some of the changes, and there's been significant advances in drilling tech. I'm just giving a few examples, not the only thing, but there's been significant advances in drilling technology that makes certain minerals more available than maybe they once were. There's been exponential increases in in recreation occurring on public lands. There's been changes in invasive plant species. Bent knot is one that comes to mind in Crook County, currently spreading up there. And also, kind of more on a local perspective, what my forester has shared with me here, we're struggling with forest health that's in decline for a variety of factors, and we tend to end up with sort of when we get a wildfire, it replaces the whole stand. So those are just a few changes that we're kind of seeing and just a few minor examples, but that's a more interesting way to think about why we're doing this. Step back a little bit here. This slide depicts an overview of sort of the planning process, and there's three takeaways I hope y'all can take from this slide. So those that were here in May, our needle moved just a little bit down, but that's not insignificant because the notice of intent published in the Federal Register on July 11th, and that sort of formally initiates that process. And so the other thing that I want folks to take away and remember, there's 3 formal opportunities for public involvement. And the first one is in the period that we're in right now, which is scoping. Have a little bit more on that information. And then there's when a draft plan comes out, there's a public comment period. And then when a proposed final plan comes out, there's a public participation period. And so I want you to store that away in your heads in terms of when there will be future public involvement. And then over on the right, we know that our scoping period is going to end August 25th, so we'll get how to make scoping comments here later, but that's a specific date. These other windows are goals. You can see the timing over here. They're goals for when we would like to have those products available for public input. I would describe those goals as, are they possible? Yes. Probable, maybe not as much. We've actually worked for the government long enough to know we're scheduled. We are, to give you a little flavor, our May meetings were intended to be public scoping meetings, and so that gives you a flavor of kind of how those things shake out. Next slide, please, Kathleen. We're also developing this planning effort in coordination with what we call cooperating agencies. A cooperating agency it's got a pretty specific definition, and I might miss pieces of it, but it's a government entity, for example, local, state, or maybe other federal entity that has knowledge or expertise or jurisdiction in certain matters of the plan, and they are helping us to craft this plan. Now, what I don't want to insinuate, even accidentally, is that this is a consensus group. You know, you're not likely to get this large of a group in consensus. Ultimately, it's BLM's determination on what's included. But we are working with them, and they have their separate review and comment periods in addition to the public. I also want to share that outside of this process, we also solicit tribal involvement, and it's kind of got its own route because it's a government-to-government thing, but it's sort of parallel along with this. And I do want to raise a concern. It was actually more brought up at our, our Niobrara County meeting in May. But one of the concerns that was brought up down in Niobrara County, and particularly at the state level, is that the heads of these state departments are not elected officials; they're political appointees. And I can't necessarily change that, but I do want to say that Senator Steinmetz extended an invitation for us to come and meet with the Joint Senate-House Agriculture Committee at their Laramie meeting, and that's in October, and we plan to do that. So I just wanted to share that was a concern that was brought up, and we hope to be able to take advantage of that invitation from Senator Steinmetz. I'm not sure how many folks actually went into the Federal Register, the public notice, and scoped things out. But this was in here, and what this slide depicts is a precursor of some themes that you are likely to see in a draft environmental impact statement and plan. And so in the RMP process, we're required to consider a very broad range of alternatives for management of resources, and as well as to provide for like a meaningful effects analysis, and socioeconomics plays into that. And so the approach that we took is sort of we took the bookend approach to try to cover our full range. And so, excuse me, there will likely be 4 themed alternatives in the draft for your comment. One is a continuation of current management, and so the intent is this plan puts forth a broad range of management scenarios and then considers the consequences of implementing those pieces, or implementing those scenarios or pieces of them. And so on one hand, we have a continuation of the current management. Then I kind of referenced, we took the bookend approach. One alternative sort of has a theme of resource protection, I guess you would say, and that would typically have the most conservation emphasis and I guess restrictions, you would say, on different management types. And then we went to the other, the opposite end of the bookend to create a themed alternative, which is a maximizing resource use alternative of those on the grounds. Typically has the fewest areas and restrictions. I think of alternative C as sort of, if it's allowed by existing laws that are out there, it's allowed. And then we have what we called a balanced themed alternative, which is sort of a blend of the two. One thing I want to point out is that BLM does not have a preferred alternative that comes later in the, and it could be a blending of all sorts of pieces. And so the broad range are thrown out there, and then the actual plan is developed. Did I miss anything from a planning perspective on that, Kathleen? Thank you. At our earlier engagement, we received a lot of questions on special designations and what the process is for that. The only special designation that arises out of a land use plan is what's called an area of critical environmental concern. So I'm just going to start with what is an ACEC. And it's an area that contains basically such a sensitive or rare resource that special management is warranted for its continuation. And so this is the process by which those are designated. They can be nominated by the public. Excuse me, but before folks have too much heartburn that there's going to be an influx of these nominations, and we would encourage those if people know about these areas. The relevance and importance criteria for an ACEC is fairly stringent, I would say, and if anybody wants more detailed information into how that goes, we do have that up. We have the manual for that process available on the webpage for this, if people really want to dive into the details. Excuse me. So there's one existing ACEC from the last plan right now in the Newcastle planning area, and that's the Whoop-Up Canyon ACEC. It's roughly 1,400 acres, and for those that are familiar, it contains outstanding petroglyph resources within that area. There is and you can see this map, there is a blue area there. There's been obviously before my time, but over the last, there's been a couple significant large fires out in that area. And some survey work following that identified another area in blue that contains some pretty significant resources. And so one of the things you will see in the draft is under a couple of the alternatives, it considered for an expansion to that area and not considered under a couple of the others. Excuse me, next slide, please. The other area that we're familiar with, I don't want to say that there's not other areas out there that we're not familiar with, but the only other area that we're familiar with that may contain the sensitivity of these types of resources is what we refer to as the Little Missouri Antelope Trap, which is in northwestern Crook County up towards the Montana line. This area contains, the Antelope Trap it contains driveline features associated with that use, and then it has a surrounding landscape of habitation and ceremonial sites within it. And so, at least in terms of our awareness, that's the only other area that would meet that relevance and important criteria. And as I mentioned, you'll see a range of alternatives where it is considered for designation under 2 alternatives and not considered under 2, as well as a suite of a suite of management. The purpose of this slide is really to provide information to you all, like I said, that can help focus in your comment and review as you're looking through this. And the reason we included this information was to help. We heard the concerns about, due to the large amount of split estate that's out there and impacts to private property rights for the surface owner from federal mineral decisions, as well as concerns about socioeconomics and viability of adjacent mineral ownership. Wanted to provide some information just how that works. So, as I alluded to, an RMP is going to make a broad level allocation. And so under fluid mineral, so essentially oil and gas leasing, it'll identify what lands are either open or closed to fluid mineral leasing, and if they are open, under what type of constraints. And you'll see major, moderate, or minor categories of those. And so a major is what's called no surface occupancy, and that means that that mineral can be developed, but not from on top of the lease, so it'd be more like a horizontal drilling scenario. Under moderate, you'll hear a couple constraints. Controlled surface use, and I'm looking at these acronyms. We're the government, so we have plenty of acronyms, and a timing limitation. An example of a timing limitation may be like a raptor nest or something that has, during the nesting window, limitations on disruptive activities. I think of a controlled surface use as sort of a buyer beware of that lease. And so if there's a known like high concentration of cultural resources or something similar to that extent, it's a sort of forewarning to the buyer of that lease that they may have siting considerations to work around. And so wanted to clarify that those fluid mineral decisions, they don't apply to other BLM programs, notably grazing permits, and they also don't have any bearing on what a private surface owner is doing with their surface. It comes into play at 2 times when BLM issues a lease for that mineral. Then those stipulations are attached to the lease. And then it comes down to when we issue a permit to develop that mineral through a well. So something that we have to consider is we can have, I made the mistake of saying we can't hurt things. We can adversely affect sensitive resources. Our permitting is smoothed substantially when we don't. I'll put it that way. So how you can contribute right now, like I said, we're in what's called public scoping, and really that's an information gathering step, although we do feel like we're working hard to try to get a feel for what is important to people. That's how you can contribute now. What matters are important to you? What needs to be looked at and evaluated? Are there management considerations that we should be aware of? And the most helpful comments are ones that are substantive, and we call those that, and you can see an example here of some. The hardest ones that are for us to respond to are opinions, and I think that really creates a dissatisfying environment when somebody, because an opinion matters and it's important to them, but they just say, oh, I don't, I like this. Noted. And that's a real like dissatisfying response to receive. And so the more specific comments can be, the more helpful they will be in crafting that. So how to make a comment, and I believe back at the front desk, if you signed in, there's a copy of this sheet. Excuse me, but there's 3 ways. You can go directly to this link. This is the project site on the webpage, and comment directly there. You can send an email to the project email, or you can send by hard copy mail to either of these addresses, and it'll get there. It'll get to us. We have obviously Kathleen is in our High Plains office in Casper, and certainly in Newcastle we have that. So there's three options. Do note that the formal, here's how I put this, and we told people this in May, we accept comments at any time. But the formal comment period for standing on the record is Friday, August 25th. So grab a handout in the back. And I apologize, I'm losing my voice a little bit. Can you still hear me all right in the back? Okay, thank you. My apologies, I'm losing it. So we have a couple more slides to present about information about other BLM ongoing efforts. But I wanted to also stop at this slide because this is how you can most meaningfully contribute to our planning process. BLM headquarters has some other ongoing efforts, which to my chagrin is convoluting our efforts, but we did receive quite a few questions on those, and so we wanted to prepare a couple of slides and prepare some handouts that we can get people towards that information. But on the same token, I also wanted to create a separation so that we are not soliciting comments on those matters. This is our effort at hand. So want to provide some information. I also want to create some separation to avoid confusion. So let's go to those slides now, if you don't mind, Kathleen. So I'll just say our BLM headquarters or national office has a couple of ongoing planning efforts. They're working on updating and revising the sage grouse management plans. This is further confusing because I didn't put this on the slide because it's not our information to share, but the state of Wyoming is going through a parallel process updating their maps. And in an ideal world, because I think this is opinion, the only way it's going to work in Wyoming, those maps should align up. But they're going through a parallel process. And this can impact our planning effort because the outcome of this plan will basically amend all the existing resource management plans. And so there's information, like I said, we put this on a handout as well. The other national planning effort that's going on is reviewing solar development potential. And back in 2012, they evaluated it across mainly more of the southern tier states. And now they're conducting an evaluation of solar development in more of the northern tier states, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Washington, and Wyoming. And so here's where you can go for more information on that. And those are planning efforts, and so the outcomes of those can ultimately amend our plans.
They're in the public comment period right now.
Oh, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Kathleen, appreciate that. BLM headquarters is also proposing a couple of rulemaking or regulation procedures. One is known as the public lands rule. With this rule, like conservation leasing would be a thing, and that was a little bit unique for us to hear out in the field, where it feels like conservation is a part of all, whether we approve an oil well with reclamation behind it, or healthy rangelands, or timber harvest. It feels like conservation is something we're already doing. But what we have been told is that these proposed rules, they do not require nor amend land use plans, so it would not affect our effort, and that also valid existing rights and authorizations are also grandfathered into those rules. The other rulemaking that our headquarters is going through.
Just what you said before about prior existing rights on this conservation effort that's being pushed by the Director of Interior BLM.
The last
They've
thing
had this, when I'm coming up, it started about 3 months ago or longer, that they come out on this, that a conservation easement has the same right as a grazing right.
So basically, somebody could buy a ranch and non-use is the same as use under this new rule. Is that true?
I'm going to be frank that what we've been told is that existing rights, there's no impact to them, whether they're, a grazing lease, an existing oil and gas lease on top of those. But how a hypothetical conservation lease, the information that we have available to us is the same as what the public has, the same as what the public has available for the most part. So
That was neither yes or no. You didn't answer the question. Would non-use be the same as use? So somebody could buy a ranch, put it into non-use, not graze it or do anything with it, and that would be a legitimate use of the land.
Under the grazing regulations, you can't take non-use for more than so many years. How a hypothetical conservation lease would play out, I don't know the answer to your question.
The final rule isn't expected until the spring. So it's just been a proposed rule. The commenting period has ended in July. And so there isn't a final rule, so we don't know yet.
And my follow-up to that would be, with in 2022, the Supreme Court ruled in West Virginia versus the EPA that the agencies, that federal agencies must be able to point to a specific congressional authorization for their actions, for any new rules. So what congressional authorization would be made for this, could you point to for this new rule?
I can't point to a specific congressional authorization for that. I know that's not a satisfying response.
They have a question and answer on that website specifically for that, and it's part of the handout, but we're not involved in that, and it's getting brought over into our planning effort, and so we felt like we had to explain that there's other things that are happening that people are feeling are this planning effort, but they're not. But we gave you the website so you can go look.
Well, that goes back to the mineral ones that you were just talking about too, because for any mistake, the major questions doctrine states that coming out of the SCOTUS, that for major economic and any decision for major economic or political importance, that the federal agencies must be able to point to, and that goes to the policing, to their authorization for your actions. So for either one of those, for those rules, what authorization are
for the mineral leasing? That's the Mineral Leasing Act of 1920. So I'll point to that one. For resource management plans, it's the Federal Lands Policy and Management Act 1976. So I'll point to those ones.
That you can just.
We're not doing the public lands rule. That's not what we're doing here tonight.
Well, we are dealing with the concept of that the federal lands that are administered by the Department of Interior through the BLM are federal lands, period. And so there are laws, court decisions, that protect our grazing rights. And this thing is coming up that could possibly be slipped into the Newcastle management plan. And that's what we are concerned about. Livestock grazing on all federal lands is a lawful business. And a lawful business is private property. And private property will be protected by all levels of government by the Constitution of the United States. And therefore, this thing is in the background. Our people in the livestock, like Public Lands Commission and National Cattlemen's Association, I suppose the Farm Bureau and so forth, are fighting this damn thing tooth and nail. But it's the way it's written and so forth, that it can come in and be on the equal footing the equal footing of livestock grazing. Livestock grazing on the federal lands. These lands in Niobrara County, Weston County, Cook County, but mainly in Niobrara County, were withdrawn by executive order through the Pickett Act in 1934 to 1937. Mainly executive orders were 1937 for one purpose and one purpose only, livestock grazing. And the livestock producers, such as myself, such as this gentleman, and many others sitting in this room, we have a preference right that is protected by law, that anything other than livestock grazing on these lands has to be secondary. That is what the courts have ruled. Red Canyon, sheep versus Ike's, U.S. versus New Mexico, or the opposite way, and several other that authorized by the Pickett Act for the president to set aside through executive order, which he did, and maintaining the valid existing rights, even up through the FLPMA, Federal Lands Management Act of 1967, but the Taylor Grazing Act of 1934 protect congressional law supported by the courts that anything other, whether it's raising prairie dogs or whatever, has to be secondary to protecting the lawful business of livestock grazing on the federal land. We have that preference, and we have to maintain that preference. I'm not spelling off from the top of my head. I'm giving you facts to the best of my ability at this particular time. Even this document here that you're working on, the allotment, or not the allotment, but the management plan, is nothing more than a guidance document. And if it's repugnant to the Constitution and the laws that are written, it's not valid.
Thank you, Major. Excellent points, and I do want to tie back to what I perceive and that I'm hearing, and to your gentleman's question too. Part of the underlying concern too is that even though that's not the public lands rule is not what we're talking about necessarily tonight, the idea that it's out there happening behind the scenes, and I didn't mean to imply that it's like behind the scenes and hidden. There's information, but the fact that it's out there and the concern that it can pull into this process.
There are no public lands, they're federal industry lands. There's no public lands left in there. Public domain is gone. All the lands that are federally, that are under federal administration are no longer public lands per se.
Thank you, Major Hirschberger. Eloquently said, sir. And I know that that wasn't a direct answer to your question, sir. Let me wrap this up because we had one more, and then we'll actually go to.
No, this is it. This is the last one because we did the plans before this.
Okay,
These are the
sorry.
regulations.
Before you move on with this, a real simple question, there's a real simple answer. Will this proposed land use rule impact this plan?
The answer to that is no. And because that's the answer that's been given to me. So. The last sort of, I guess, rulemaking procedure that's currently going through is an update to oil and gas leasing. And under that consideration, looking at formalizing the royalty rates that were made by the Inflation Reduction Act and infrastructure law. And then also increasing bond, I mean, there's some other fees associated with leasing that are increasing as well, or proposed to increase, as well as, increasing bond amounts for oil and gas operators. And so these are things that the answer is, it does not affect our land use planning effort. Certainly it can play out in the day-to-day operations of the functions that we work on. So like I said, once again, trying to provide and point towards people toward information, but also trying to create some separation so we can have meaningful input on the plan we're working on. So with that was sort of the end. I know that was a lot of information to work through, but we were trying to touch upon things that we knew were of interest. We had, at our earlier meetings, we had a real casual sort of question and answer session. I would like to keep it casual and answer questions or people make comments, but due to the number of folks, I might ask that you sort of self-moderate to a couple minutes to make sure that everybody that has a chance for a question maybe gets the opportunity to ask it about this planning process. And then of course, come 7, we'll end the formal meeting, but we'll be picking up tables and chairs and happy to catch people one-on-one as well. Go ahead, Marty.
Could you go back to the alternatives, please, and perhaps explain those a little better so that people understand that we're putting out, if the comment period is to ask which alternative we'd like to go down, what you had on your slide here is much more detailed, which is not very detailed, but it's much more than what was on the federal register.
Okay. Thank you. Great questions. This information isn't on the Federal Register right now, and that's very helpful. This comment period on the alternatives will occur when a draft comes out. So roughly this winter is when people will comment upon what I would say the content of these themes, are the themes. But right now we're just in a period of scoping, which is more of an issue gathering information phase. And so right now there is no more detailed information to provide out to the public, but that will come when a draft is released. And so as part of the environmental impact statement, they compare all those alternatives, and that's roughly, hopefully, would be this coming winter. Yes, I saw your hand.
You keep saying on the Federal Register, but I don't know, I don't know how to find that. On the Federal Register.
It's on the e-planning site.
Oh, okay. Can you go to that comment sheet form? So if you take our handout, you can go right here, and there's a link to it there to the Federal Register notice, or you could go a Google search of the Federal Register. You can see everything that comes out in there. You could search by date. July 11th is when it posted. So a couple of avenues to get to it. Either on the sheet we gave you, there's a link that you can get to it, or you could Google Federal Register, and I'm sure you could find it. Great questions, thank you. Sorry, sir, in the back.
What do they do with our comments? Do they make any difference, or is it just fodder and they let us have a word?
What is done with comments depends upon their substance. We're oftentimes asked the question, and I'm going to talk at BLM, for example, like on a wild horse gather issue. Tens of thousands of comments will come in on that are roughly the same. So it's one of the things I always share with people is that it's not a voting system. Commenting is not a voting system, and so the level of response is what I would say commensurate with the level of substance of the comment. That can it be addressed, or how do we address this, or can we incorporate this in? And that's why I encourage folks to stay away from opinion type comments and provide some rationale behind what they're sharing. So.
And mass produce those words.
What's that?
And mass-produced postcards.
Yeah, there you go. Go ahead, Ted.
I'm curious about Whoop Canyon and the area in Crook County of expanding the area of Whoop Canyon. I know we need to protect culture and heritage, but will this still allow grazing? We're going to make a wilderness area out of this?
Yes.
2 areas, or management for forest? We know we had a fire there that endangered the picture cliffs. But if we don't cut the trees or graze the grass, the fire's going to be right back there.
No, typically, management actions that help with whatever the resources of interest are allowed for, as well as, like I said, valid existing mining claims, leases within those areas, grazing as well. There is I do want to be forthright, within the WHOOP, there is an 11-acre exclosure right now around some of the petroglyphs, but the other area at question is grazed. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I like those 4 categories. How would you describe the existing plan? Which of those 4 categories would it most closely fit in your assessment?
Assessment, I would say it probably would line up closer to the blended one. That's oftentimes where BLM ends up because of our multiple use mission. And so oftentimes our actions end up sort of blended that way. So I would say maybe most similar to the blended.
By blended, you don't mean 90-10, you mean 50-50 balanced? Is that as in category D? Or what do you mean by blended? I didn't see the word blended.
By blended, and maybe let me give an example of maybe there's a particular, I'm not trying to think of what a good example would be. Oh, let's say it's like important wildlife winter range. This is hypothetical. I'm just trying to create an example. So for fluid mineral leasing, maybe under the most conservation theme, those lands are closed to fluid mineral leasing, but under the blended, they're available with a timing limitation of disruptive activities in the winter. And so it's more blended in the types of acknowledging those resources and some prescriptions to help manage them, but allowing for flexibility. And so I don't know that it's necessarily like a percentage type of thing, but that's more how I would describe a blended alternative.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Dan.
On your Whoop Canyon, that is a wonderful historical area.
Mm-hmm.
Do you plan to develop that where people can actually go see it?
Well, I'll give a complicated answer to that because actually landowner permission is necessary to be able to get to the site. You need to get landowner permission to cross and get to the BLM administered lands. Right now, we're managing it as sort of a tour, like for example, the school kids go out there, tour type of thing, but ultimately permission is needed from the landowner. So I can't say, yeah, we're going to develop it and when it's not fully within our discretion to push that. So. Great question, thanks, Dave.
So federal law requires, well, FLIPNA requires that you coordinate with the local governments. Sometimes I feel that sometimes the NEPA process, you go into the cooperating agencies instead of doing the coordination. So are you going to plan on coordinating with not necessarily just the cooperating agencies, but with the government entities that you listed? So you will go and get their land use plans and have a conversation with those government entities?
Yeah, and I guess that's it. We have done that through the cooperating agency process. As you know, Weston County is a formal cooperator. But we have gotten those natural resource management plans from the counties, and we've received some specific requests to meet with the county commissions on a couple of topics.
So you will do a coordination
Yeah.
to have those conversations. Okay, I'm glad to hear that.
Thanks, Marty. Go ahead, John.
At our earlier meeting,
I didn't ask about carbon capture and some of that is, I got the download, my computer wouldn't take that thing, but when I Googled land use plan provisions for the BLM in Wyoming and Nebraska, then you sort through, and the thing I downloaded is 362 pages. I have reviewed it, but I've not read it thoroughly. But are there any discussions about carbon capture or selling carbon credits on behalf of the BLM or the government?
Not locally, nor have we received any interest. There is not carbon capture or carbon credits, but particularly in the southwest Wyoming, like Kemmerer area, carbon sequestration or CO2, but CO2 injection and sequestration. They're basically pumping that into the formations on the BLM lands. Right now, we're processing those under like a right-of-way type of action, but we haven't received any interest or demand in there, so we aren't specifically or haven't been specifically looking to it. But if we need to, please point us in that direction, Tom.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Dan.
I think the elephant in the room here is people don't trust you. I mean, not you specifically, your departments, federal government as a whole. That's what you're fighting, I think. People worried, people scared.
Thank you, Dan. I suspect you're correct.
And the way I look at it, down in, what was it, Nevada, I think, they had the turtle. Up here is supposedly the sage grouse. We're gonna have the same kind of deal happen up here, coming down the road. I hope not. I'll put it like that. You don't have to answer that.
Yeah, I don't think there is an answer to that, so thank you, Dan. Yes, sir.
Well, and to Dan's point, it says right on your website that the proposed rule includes a roadmap to align the BLM with other land management agencies such as the U.S. Forest Service in ensuring the agency is inventorying and assessing the health of public lands, including ensuring the agency is inventorying and assessing the health of public lands, including watersheds, forests, and wildlife habitat. To me, that just seems like the BLM and the Forest Service and stuff trying to get its foot in the door to create a Buffalo Commons or whatever else and usurp the ranchers from these public managed lands and kick them off. And there is a lot of mistrust, especially when, as I stated, in 1976, Congress passed the Federal Land Policy and Management Act so that these public managed lands would be open to multiple use. And then now you have last year the Supreme Court saying that you have to be able to point to specific congressional authorization under the if there's going to be major economic and political importance to change any rules. So if you're going to change these rules and you can't point to any congressional authorization to do that, do you really expect of those 4 decisions, if you make any huge changes, that the Western, besides like California and Washington, any states that have huge chunks of BLM, it to stand up in a court of law when it gets to the Supreme Court, when it's challenged?
Thanks for sharing that information. Was there a question in there?
What do you think that when they make this rule and it's not a lawful rule, you make changes, that it's going to stand up?
whether it's a lawful rule.
Even if you go through the process, you don't have the authority to make the rule under Congress because they haven't delegated that to you.
Okay, can you help me tie that to our resource management plan and what we're doing?
Gotta have funding.
The Supreme Court said that you have to be able to point to a specific congressional authority to change a rule.
Yeah, we're not changing a rule. We're working on revising our resource management plan. I do hear that you are concerned about this with the rulemaking authority, but
That's your rules, right? That's where you set the rules.
I know we're talking back and forth. We're not, BLM headquarters is proposing these rules.
Rules. Thank you. You just said proposing the rules, and now you're saying it's not rules. So is it A or B? It's either rules or it's not rules.
The slide behind you says rule.
Yeah.
Yeah, but.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
Okay,
Yes, please help.
can I help?
Yeah.
We're doing a resource management plan and like how you comment on that, right? So that's part of FLIPMA. It's required that we do it. But what we're trying to explain in the last two slides, which is one of the handouts back there, is that there are other things happening within the BLM right now that are getting rolled into our resource management plan that are different. And so we're trying to actually separate them. We're trying to educate and separate, right? So because there's a lot of information about the onshore oil and gas leasing rule right now that's currently in its public comment period, and the public lands rule where the public comment period just ended. Those are completely different than what we're here to collect comments on. And so the only reason why we're mentioning them is because they're getting a lot of traction, and we don't want to waste your comment, if that's what you're commenting on, by commenting it in the wrong place and in the wrong venue. So we're trying to educate and separate. So we're not actually doing a rule. We're letting you know there are some rules out there that you can comment on. We're going to show you where you can comment on that and get more information about it. But as far as the resource management plan that we're here and the open public scoping period right now, that's different. It's not a rule.
Thank you, Kathleen. That was a much better explanation. I was struggling to come up with that. Thank you.
And that circles it back around. How are you making a management plan with the public lands rule and the mineral leasing rule not affecting your management? How does that happen?
Well, for one, the proposed rules are just that, proposed. So they're not in place while we're going through this process. And resource management plans are currently in cycles of revisions and do not necessarily, we follow whatever current policies are in place, in terms of guidance, but a lot of rules have no direct bearing on what a resource management plan is. A guidance document and a land use allocation plan. And so these proposed rules have no direct bearing on what's going on with that. Go ahead, Dan.
Maybe move things along a little easier. If I understand what's going on here tonight, it's a comment. It's a meeting to put comment in. And a lot of the questions that's come up should be asked at the next meeting, because some of these questions they have may not be proposed. But if they are proposed, then you need to have an answer to it, because the next one is comments on what this plan is. And you're admitting tonight that you don't know what this plan is yet. So it's all hypothetical. But once the plan the draft is drafted, that's when we're going to have to get into some hard questions, and you're going to have to come back with hard answers. So I would like to make my comment, because that's what I'm here for tonight, and that's what you asked for tonight. And I'm a little confused because there's words being thrown around in this room that do not go together. Public lands, federal lands. There is no such thing as federal lands. It can't be. It's unconstitutional, and that's the highest law of the land. BLM is one of the few initials that are mentioned in the Constitution. And BLM was given a specific duty when it was established under the Constitution to manage the federal lands, because we had federal land purchases back in those days, until they could be managed by the state. And that's why the Constitution says the federal government can only own forts, ports, and military magazines. And then they throw in some federal monuments and stuff, but they're not really constitutional. So my comment here tonight would be, looking at the map, and I'm just going to pick on Nebraska because it's the easiest to define. I've been self-employed since I was in the 4th grade, and I've had my own company ever since the 4th grade. And I'm tired of government regulations. Every year it gets more and more. But your purpose for this plan is to figure out the best way to manage the land. Is that not what we heard here tonight? That's the ultimate goal here.
That's fair.
That's the ultimate goal here. Well, you can't convince me that any parcel of 40 acres could not be better off managed by the state of Nebraska at a better cost, at a better representative, and a whole lot less headache for you guys. Because federal land's that small. Now, you take a big tract, I won't get into that tonight, but clearly, all these small tracts, the state owns them. Not the federal government, the state. When they take statehood, they took property. I know they give you this rigmarole that we signed away, that when we came into a state, they let us be a state, but we gave the permission for the federal government to manage the land. Well, you already had that authority. We just didn't take it away from you when we became statehood. But that has to be a contract. And a contract usually has the beginning date and an ending date. And if it's an ending date, at the end of that date, it has to be renegotiated or it comes to an end. I do not know the legislature, because they keep throwing up the reason we gave our stuff away, because I don't believe they can. The state can't give it away, only the people can. And the people of Wyoming never did vote on that. So, the land management you guys had when we first became a statehood, I will say we probably couldn't manage all the land that was not initially homesteaded or whatever. But we're a big state now. We got a lot of bureaucrats in Cheyenne. Lots of them.
Too many.
They're liberal Democrats. We have a state forestry. We have state parks, we have states everything. So definitely all the small parcels are best operated by us, and it would take a lot less money for you guys. You're spending more money, but take the money you're spending on a 40-acre plot to manage it, and you divide that out, there's no way it comes out. Now, you can take a parcel of 10,000 acres, and you can manage it for probably 1/10 per acre of what, and these are just figures I'm throwing out, that would take to manage that 40. And you don't have the problem that you're going to have at Whoop Up of going across private land. Give that back to the state. We held up our hand and said, we're big boys. We're going to be states now, not just territories. And that would eliminate a lot of the problem that you're going to have at your next meeting. But I would question you to come back at the next meeting and prove to me that the best management for them 40-acre parcels, economically or what, and both, is for the BLM to manage them, because I don't think you can prove that. That's just my comment. I think you've got to put on a good presentation, and I hope this gets back to a comment, because that's what you're here for, is comments. And then we can debate, because we know a lot of us ain't gonna like the plan. So they will debate it, but then we have something to debate. It's not, well, what if? What? That's my comment. Thank you.
No, thank you, Dan. That was very well said. And you just keyed up on one of the challenges. And in fact, so I'd encourage people to take a look at this when the plan comes out, and that's a great scoping comment right now, because one of the things that the plan evaluates in those allocation decisions is identifying disposal parcels. And ultimately the goal would be, I mean, in the best interest of the public, would be to look at disposing of these isolated pieces that are difficult to manage for an entity, and have a land, we use the term land tenure, but that's basically a description of the ownership pattern that's out there that's manageable and in the best interest of the public. And so land disposal is an allocation item that's looked at in these plans. And so that's a great comment for scoping, and will be a great thing to look at in the draft plan. So. Go ahead, Tom.
Question for procedure. If we have made vocal oral comments, do we need to write those down and submit them written also? Or have you got a record?
We are hearing them. There's pros and cons of, so we are hearing comments, and notes are being taken. I would also encourage, but you get themes from that, right? And then whenever you record somebody's comment, there's interpretation, however. And so I also encourage the written comment, because there's no way to misinterpret then this is my written comment. And so both to that, Tom, notes are being taken, part of the administrative record. I also encourage written comment to avoid interpretation.
Thank you.
Couple questions. In your revisions and plans that the BLM does, have you ever given land back to the people? Or do the land amounts that BLM have keep accruing higher and higher?
In general, so that's a piece. So one of the things, so the Federal Land Policy and Management Act basically identified that lands that were within federal ownership would remain unless identified for disposal through the land use planning process. I was, for 7 years, I was in the Cody field office before coming over to Newcastle, and we did roughly 6 disposal actions over the course, and I don't have the acreage totals in front of me. And by those counties, we tried to look at, because of the perception of like no net gain in federal ownership, but there had been a lot of bentonite patents from the 80s that took a lot of land out of federal ownership, so there was sort of a deficit there. That's something that's being looked at, and we are trying to find ways to dispose efficiently. Here's one issue. Disposing of federal land is not an efficient process. We are trying to find ways that we can more efficiently do that, because it makes way for things like the Marton Ranch made big news that the BLM acquired down in Casper, because it was a large acquisition that significantly threw off the ledger, if you want to look at it that way. And so, from a statewide or national perspective, I don't know the answer to your question, but typically we try to look at a local level to keep that. And so it's through this process that we do dispose of lands, but I acknowledge it's not an efficient process.
So, wait, I've got another question for you. So I'm a little confused. You said you didn't know the answer to my question. My answer does, have you given back lands in any of these revisions?
I can't speak to Newcastle. The lands themselves do not give back lands, but speaking as a whole, they identify the lands for disposal, and then through a variety of, I guess I would say, actions, they can be disposed of through direct sale. There can be exchanges that affect the ownership pattern. But given back, I guess to answer that question, no, and I can't speak to how many like land actions were done in Newcastle since the plan.
So another thing is, so around here in our area and other areas, there's a lot of public land for hunting, but unfortunately this public land is now becoming surrounded by private property, and we can't get to it. It's so chopped up you can't find a corridor to get in there or whatever. It's so confusing. And with more people coming into the area and buying more land, they want to get it, and it's good for you guys if a private property owner buys land abutting the BLM, and then they're shut off. We can't get to their land. You love that stuff. So what do we do about that?
I think maybe
'Cause
that's a
that's
stretch
become-
to say we love that
Ah,
stuff.
wow.
In fact,
That's an opinion.
yeah, that's an opinion. There
you
you
can't
go.
give it, so all right.
There's obviously quite a push for public and for increasing public access, and so how you, and it's very difficult, especially in the ownership pattern that you noted and is up there. You would need to access that public land via a county road or some other road that has a public easement. But that's a private property right to be able to control who crosses their property. And so if there's no public access easement via county road or other to cross there, I don't think you can't force that access. But you're bringing up a very known issue, and it's exacerbated in these types of ownership patterns.
So all that public land can't be touched by the public because it's landlocked.
Without landowner permission.
Right.
There's lots of lands that are like that.
And so you say that, maybe not you, but the federal government likes that situation because they will actually reach out to property owners. So anyway, one last question. So you mentioned solar, right? And solar fields.
That's one of the national planning efforts
Right.
going
So
on.
what about wind? You into that?
Can you answer that question better, Kathleen? On how we're looking
Well,
at that?
they did do a national wind programmatic environmental impact statement quite a few years ago. I don't remember the exact date right now. So there'll probably be another one that they're going to update again, right? Just like they did for the solar. But the need isn't as great because the solar one left out so many states. So that's why they are doing that one, I guess, first, if you will. I don't know when the next one will be done, but this plan will address wind and solar, renewable energy, and possibly even geothermal, right? Because it's out there.
So my reason for asking that question is because BLM is really big on protecting species, right? All these endangered species, you find it on your land, and we got to shut that down to the public because the long-eared bats flying around somewhere, right? So we got to shut that, stop logging. How do you justify wind farms, which Wyoming is now the home of the largest wind farm in the country being built to purpose California? How do you justify all the bats, eagles, birds of prey that get murdered by these wind farms? Because we're all about protecting species. We'll shut down land in a heartbeat if we see a lizard. But we're willing to kill thousands of bats and birds of prey that affect our ecosystem for money.
But they don't shut down the wind farms during certain sensitive timeframes. They'll stop drilling or workover rigs on oil wells, but they won't make those wind farms shut down during that same period of time.
Go ahead, Dan.
No answer? I'm just wondering how you justify it. That was my question.
I don't know that we do justify it. We manage BLM as a multiple use agency, and so it's like threading a needle to find the balance between providing for mining, providing for oil and gas.
The needle is the Constitution.
Okay.
And I know. See, I understand that you can't answer all questions, but you're trying to neuter us by saying no opinions. Okay, freedom of speech is all about opinions.
I don't think I've.
Yeah, you said it several times. We don't really want to hear your opinions. We're here to hear specifics, and I understand that too. And I gave you specifics.
Okay. Sir, in the back.
By disposal, you don't mean to sell it to private people, do you?
Yep.
You do?
Yep.
And that's
You
just
can't
like you
sell
did
something
with
you don't
True
own.
Oil. And like he was saying, True Oil up here, you swap some land with them. And since you swapped it, it was just a swap. They got their land up here. Well, then that shut off a bunch of land because it became private then. And like he was saying, it shut off some Forest Service and some BLM because you swapped that and now it's private. We can't get into it. So you're willing to do that, though.
Like a 200-yard stretch that used to be open is now
Yeah, you can get in there, now you can. But you're saying you're gonna do that. That's your.
lands are identified under either identified for disposal or retention. So that's an allocation that comes out of these. Go ahead, Dan.
My comment is, the best way to dispose of that land is you don't own it. In Wyoming anyway. You just have a contract with the state to manage it. And that's true in the whole United States. You cannot own it. So you can't sell it. But you are managing it. And you said your plan was to see the best way to get rid of it. You're looking at that. The best way to get rid of it, and the most economical way, is just go into the states that you agreed to manage the land with and say, wait a minute, this contract's no longer working for us. We can't manage this land economically. We're going to turn it back to the state so you can manage it. And then you don't sell it. You can't sell something you don't own, and you don't own, the federal government does not own that land. You're managing it. It took a long time to get the Forest Service to admit that, but you talk to a forest ranger, and they're all badass gun-packing men now, and they'll tell you that they're not owning it because they know they can't, but they're managing it. And they shut off the gates to that land the same as we're talking about private property shutting off gates to this. And they shut them off. Some rangers take their friends in. If they get an elk tag, they unlock the gate, they go in, but if you cross it, you're in trouble. So you can't sell that land to True Oil. You can give it, all you can do is remove yourself from managing it because the states already own it. You are a federal agency. Federal agencies can own no land. So that really set my light off when you said you sell it, because you can't sell it because you don't own it. I can't sell a car I don't own. I can't sell a cow I don't own. So the federal government can sell no land. They can just turn it back to the people that own it, which is the states. When we got statehood, we took ownership. We signed a little piece of paper saying you could manage it, but you can't sell it. That's not managing it. That's our property. That's just my comment on that. And I'd like to see a cost analysis on that 40 acres at the next meeting, if you can.
I have a question about your planning. Are the goals of America the Beautiful considered by our district office when you're working on your plan? America the Beautiful is 30-30 plan. It's on the the Secretary of Interior's website. You're familiar with America the Beautiful?
In the extent of, I assume you're the
As our-
30 by 30 initiative
or any of,
thing?
Yeah, where they're trying to take 30% and lock it up. Are any of those goals implemented or considered when you're working on your district plan?
Well, I can appreciate, I think that's an overriding, concern that's being shared here. Of when that's out there, how is that influencing and fiddling into this plan?
Yeah.
We haven't heard internally or externally any proposals that are related to that for management of the lands. Tried to correct my language there.
And one of the, looking at the proposals for the planning, we noticed that they mentioned eagle nests, and that during certain times of year there is an exclusionary zone of 1 mile radius, which calculates out to be about 1,800 acres. A lot of small footprint ag producers in the 3 counties and in Nebraska, South Dakota, that may be affected by this are less than 2,000 acres. There are permits, grading permits, that are less than that exclusion area. Even on large permits, that takes a considerable chunk of that grazing out. In this planning process, what's going to take priority? The producers who have qualified for leases, applied for them, been approved, pay for them, and depend on them for your bird nests?
I'm not aware of any grazing operations that have been limited by bird nest timing. I think maybe you're alluding to, and maybe I even used the example of the timing limitation on the fluid mineral development piece. And that doesn't apply to grazing permits on BLM land or
It's not exempted in the website, though. It just mentions the exclusion during nesting periods.
At least you know where the mineral rights are.
Are there other questions?
I have a couple questions.
Oh, sorry.
On the planning process, is there a hard copy of the decision document at the Newcastle field office? So I don't have to search on the web. Is there a hard copy at your Newcastle BLM field office?
The RMP.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
We're talking to try to determine your answer. Sorry, I'm late.
I mean, I have a hard copy. Do you have more hard copies at the office?
Okay.
So she's talking about the rod.
We can put that in our public room, a hard copy, if you'd like to come by and see it. There's hard copies of the existing plan that's in place, and we can put a hard copy in our public room.
So you'll have a hard copy that I can just pick up at the Newcastle field office then?
Yeah, or come look at it.
Because that might simplify a lot of the process, because you know, you're having a lot of different things that they're commenting on in different time spans. So it's very confusing to all of us, you know, of what your decision notice that you're really looking for, right? Is that the one of July 11th? Is that the decision notice that you want us to comment on?
Let me just clarify. So there is no existing plan to comment
Right.
upon. This is it's in the development of that. And so I think what I'm hearing you say is you would like hard copies of materials to comment on made available. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. When we have those, we can put them in our public room available. We have a public room as you come into our office.
Okay. Then, so we need to comment by August 25th.
For scoping,
For
the scoping, the period we're in, August 25th is the comment period, but then there'll be two more formal when a draft comes out, and then when a proposed final comes out. There are also comment periods then. I can't say when exactly those comment periods are.
Do we need to make comments to your Newcastle office or Casper office to be on public scoping list?
Either works. You can make a comment, you can mail them to either place. They'll get there. You can do an email, or you can, I'm picking up that the website isn't your thing, but you can mail them to either of those two addresses.
And yes, the date is August 25th.
And then you'll be having a list, a public scoping list of addresses, because the Forest Service does that. They make a list of people who have commented, then you'll be sent all these documents. Do you do it the same way at the BLM?
Do we want somebody makes a comment and sign it or send that?
They do that in the Forest Service commonly.
We aren't planning to do that, but you can get on our mailing interest by, did you sign in? To make sure that you're notified of, okay.
And that's how you'll get the draft statement that you're going to be preparing after August 25th?
We won't be, we don't anticipate a draft coming out until winter time at some point. This public scum issue gathering is what we're in right now. So for issues, that's the August 25 date.
Okay. The other question I have in my mind, is the Mallow Trail going to be impacted by any of these activities?
I haven't heard any proposals for it to be impacted, I guess. Do you have what's a specific concern about Mallow Trail?
Well, right now, I would like to have it as recreational use or grazing or whatever, but keep it as multiple use.
That's a great comment. That's fantastic
We
information.
don't need to sell it just to somebody.
Okay.
We'd like to all be able to hike or else have cattle on it or whatever, you know.
Thanks, that's a great comment.
So that's what I need, that's what you're looking for now.
Yes,
Okay, so the Mallow Trail might be part of it.
Well, the Mallow Trail, the lands that the Mallow Trail are on are part of this planning
Part of
process.
this.
Yep.
So is it any of the state or any of the BLM lands in Weston County?
Yeah, all of the BLM administered lands within Weston County and Crook and Niobrara.
Okay. Now, is there a map that you have available here besides this little one here of that? Do you have a map that we could look at? There's just this little one here.
We have we can
That's
put
pretty
this. We can put the
simplified.
slide up. I know it's broad scale when you try to look at all 3 counties.
It's pretty little to see what actually going to happen, you know. Here.
We can go back to that slide that just has the counties, and you're welcome to come up and take a closer
Okay.
look when we finish up
How many
here.
acres are going to be impacted in Weston County?
How many are?
For BLM lands?
You know the
Just the whole planning area.
the whole planning area, Crook, Weston, and Niobrara, is about 287,000 acres. So
Quite a
broke down by county, I don't know.
Quite a substantial amount then.
I think Major Hirschberger was before you. Then we'll come back. Go ahead, Major.
A question, is there any chance we can extend the comment period now, 3.5 weeks to the 25th? 3 weeks have already passed, and for some of us, it'd be beneficial for another. I know we need a deadline, but maybe a 30-day extension for the comment for the scoping to give us time to give more detailed considerations for the scoping period. I'd like to request a 30-day extension.
We'll take that under consideration.
Thank you.
We did extend it actually from 30 to 45 days to make it where we are, but we'll take your request under
The
consideration.
agencies are always short on, particularly who reads the Federal Register to begin with. That takes 10 hours a day to read that thing. The day is shot.
So in the back, I think there was another question. Sir, no, the orange shirt, you had another question?
No
Oh,
more.
okay.
Well, I did. Can you go on that westoncounty.org and see all your BLM land? You know, the tracks of it.
I know if you go the like the state assessors that has all the state assessors website shows parcels. You know, you can come by the office and see maps. Yep. There's also, I mean, web mapping. You know, like the Onyx Hunt, and a lot of those provide ownership maps as well. Are ways to look. So.
Second question for me, and then just a comment about my first question. You never did say whether it was A, B, C, or D. You just said blended. So I was beginning to wonder if you're unwilling to say which category is the current plan most closely, mirroring in terms of your categories. But my second question is, I read about the May BLM meeting only just like a day after it happened, because it's a couple days after that I got I don't get my pay for the day it's published, it's mailed to me. So there was a statement that press releases were made, but I'm curious why the Newsletter Journal didn't get an earlier press release so that they could publicize the date of the meeting in sufficient time so that other interested parties could attend. Because I do recall reading after the fact, there were comments, pardon me, that people thought it was not well publicized. So I don't know do you know if a press release was made to the Newsletter Journal, and if so, when it was made?
I hope so. Can you go back to that outreach slide? I'm grateful to see the turnout tonight because outreach has been something to try to get the message. We've tried to, and it's been good that we had the early engagement meetings because we were trying different techniques and to get the message out, and you kind of learn as you go. And this is the best turnout that we've had thus far, but typically, so we do provide press releases to the local newspapers, and so we've been learning about how they publish and their deadlines to make sure that we get press releases, timely out in front of advance. So we've been learning some of that. We've also been paying for public notices. In addition, we've done some radio outreach. We've posted flyers in the grocery stores and post offices in little communities. We've done hard copy mailings. From our outreach methods, we did have a good email list, and we tried to literally network those people that had attended to say, spread this word out. And so we've been trying a variety of techniques, including doing press releases, but journals or publications are of no obligation to print a press release or pick it up. So we've tried to offset that by paying for public notices, but people don't do that as well. I do want to go back to your other question you asked about the alternatives. I think I answered that in saying that I would consider it most closely to alternative D, blended, and that's just because as a multiple use agency we tend to end up that way.
Oh, thank you. I didn't hear the part about D. I just heard blended. So that's why I came back and said 90-10, that's still a blend, like ethanol and gasoline. But would there be a way to find out if or when a press release was made prior to the May meeting? I would have attended had I known. And I didn't read it. I haven't missed reading a single issue of the paper. Maybe I missed that release.
If you would get a hold of Kim or even me if I'm at the office, we can find that out for you, and fairly quickly.
But, okay. Because I'd be in, and there may have been some, I know there was information after the fact. What I'm getting about is folks need to get the word beforehand. This one was well publicized beforehand. That's why you see folks here, but it wasn't necessarily all that well publicized by your office. No offense, man.
But you come by with the date of that meeting, and we can look in the week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks prior. We have those papers. We have both digital and hard copy of those papers.
Thank
and
you,
we can find out. Okay?
Find out, yeah. Thank you.
Go ahead, Tim. How are the alternatives put together? Who makes that decision of what is included in an alternative A, B, C, D? A lot of times it seems like the alternatives have got 3 carrots and a big stick, and so you choose the one with the least damage to what you believe. Is there any public, or how are the alternatives made up?
The alternatives are developed by basically an interdisciplinary team of folks, and those are BLM individuals, most local here, but we've got support from people in our district office in Casper and in Cheyenne. But it's also being developed in conjunction with those cooperating agencies to help. And so one of the things that that's a review we're going through with the cooperating agencies, is trying to draft up these themes. And some of the feedback we've asked for specifically amongst our cooperating agencies are, do these actions, do they fit these themes? Are the themes right? But then, so that's how they're being developed. But then the public is going to get a crack at the draft environmental impact statement that's going to have all of those alternatives and management scenarios within them. And so that's where the comment really needs to hit the road, or the rubber needs to hit the road on that. So.
Ted, to kind of expand on that, and I'm going to put Caleb Carter on the spot here. The county commissioners in the Weston County Natural Resource District are your representatives on this working group, if you communicate to your county commissioners, to the Natural Resource District, what your concerns are, it's our job to take it on to this working group.
Thank you. That is a good, obviously, particularly at a local level, there's, elected representatives that I think for the most part have a good handle on the matters that are important to their constituents. But they are I would just say they are an added mechanism for communication group. Thanks for adding that.
They're probably the premier vehicle because we have a little louder voice than a single email. And we're a collective of all the district members, all the residents and landowners and ag producers in Weston County, Niagara County. And we work in concert with Crook County to be a voice for these.
Thanks for adding that. We've got about 10 minutes left. Things were quieting down there, but are there any other questions or comment folks would like to make?
I just have a comment. I'm not familiar with the swap you guys did with the ranch, but if you've got the authority to swap that land, and there's a lot of public land, like he said, that got locked out. When you do that swap, why don't you do an easement? See if they really want that land for the land, or if they want it to block off a big chunk of public land. But an easement. Driscoll?
I'm not familiar with the specifics of that swap either, but one thing I can say now is that public access is such a focus and driver that looking at all exchanges, maintaining public access is an important consideration of that. So I'm not familiar with those circumstances, but it's a big driver now in how exchanges are looked at.
I have a question, talking about exchanges, is because it is public or because it is state land, when those exchanges are done, is that published for the 6 weeks in the papers locally? And I just haven't ever seen it before, or is it just done privately, like of lands between two people would be done?
There is robust requirements for land tenure in terms of public notifications. And part of the reason that's why, if you're going to engage in a land action, it takes quite the effort and the intestinal fortitude, I'll put it that way, to see it through. It requires so many postings in local papers. It actually has to be posted to the Federal Register, which I wish I could sort of explain the level of time and effort it takes to actually do that. And so there are robust public involvement and notification requirements for land actions.
Okay, it's just something I don't think, and I usually try and read those legal notices in the paper too, and it's not something that I think I've ever seen, that I remember ever seeing. And so I was questioning, because that is something that should be locally posted.
Yes, I would comment as a landowner, I think there's only been two in this county that were with Forest Service in the last 50 years. So it's not surprising that you don't see this notice very often. It's a long, slow process from a landowner standpoint.
I'd also address that issue because I've approached people in your office for some 30 years attempting to do land exchanges with the BLM because I have numerous 40s that are nowhere near any other public land that are just a pain in the for everybody. And there's been absolutely no response, positive response. It's the first I've seen, and I applaud that. So I'm looking forward to opportunities to do that in the has nothing to do with public access because it's public use. And very, very small isolated properties that are, as Danny says, just impossible to manage. I would question his idea of turning it to the state because they've proved they can't manage either. And so I don't know why it should go to the state because that would be a disaster also.
But it's a disaster we can control a little better, Marlon. Well, we have to.
I deal with Forest Service, I deal with the state, I deal with BLM. BLM has been quite responsive to any management that I want to do.
How do you justify them selling something they don't own or swapping something they don't own?
I'm not into that. So if you feel that way, that's good.
Well, that's the Constitution. If we don't follow that, we follow nothing.
Go ahead, Caleb.
I would just like to extend a thank you to you guys, Kathleen, on getting the word out, about this. That was one of the things, as a cooperating agency, we talked a lot about in the past because you've had meetings and it's been a struggle to get people there. And so we talked a lot about that, about how we could network together better. You talked a lot about networking. And I think the attendance at the meeting tonight is a great testament to the effort that you have gone through to partner with the district, partner with the newspapers and all the different entities, and to get the notice out to us in time that we could spread the word. So I do want to thank you guys for that. That was one of the things I know that we talked a lot about at our last cooperating agency meeting, was how do we get the word out better about these meetings and stuff. And so I appreciate your efforts on getting that information out to us so we can disseminate it out through all the various channels here in the community. And thank you everybody for coming out. I've taken lots of notes and not only does it help the BLM get a feel for what concerns are out there, but as a cooperating agency with the Weston County Natural Resource District, we also make comments to the plan, and we obviously want our comments to reflect the comments of the district members here in Weston County, and so it helps me as well. And so, like Tom said, if you have concerns or questions, you can share those with me, and that can help me to shape the comments and things that we make as a district as well. So,
Thank you, Caleb. I think we appreciate the positive feedback too, because we have been working really hard to try to get the word out and engage with folks because we've heard some of those dissatisfactions from previous efforts. So.
Plus the postcards really help, and I got several emails from different people, so that if your email is with the department, they will let you know that way too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you all for
great. Loved it.
Hold on, we got one more question.
Who is the final stop on this plan? Is it you guys here, or where does it go? Where is the plan?
Great question. We're responsible for building it in the process. The state director for BLM Wyoming is the decider on it. Great question. Hey, I'm here to get the shots taken. Really appreciate people taking time out of their busy schedules. It shows that it's important to you. So thank you much. Have a great night. Thank you guys.
See you at the next meeting. Oh, in a year. That'll be down in Boston this weekend. Oh, you're going to the meeting.
What you get out of playing sports is so much more about life skills and, just becoming stronger as an individual, learning to deal with adversity, learning to approach and challenges and taking risks and things like that, and the old adage, we learn more from our mistakes than we do our successes is certainly true. And I don't know, Coach Vaughn, he's like moral victories. He's not a big fan of.
None of us are, but
Right.
That's what we've spent the last 15 minutes talking about is if you're handed a moral victory by gosh, you celebrate it. right?
Exactly. And that's exactly right.